The winter air was cold in Los Angeles that evening. The sun was going down, hiding behind the tall buildings. Keanu Reeves walked into a small bank. He had used this bank for a long time, but nobody here knew him well. That was exactly what he wanted. Keanu was wearing an old hoodie, dark sunglasses, and had a scruffy beard. He looked like any other tired person coming to the bank before it closed. He liked walking around without being noticed. It reminded him of his life before he became famous, before he starred in big movies that made billions of dollars. He never wanted to forget what life was like for regular people. As he walked toward the short line at the back, something made him stop. He heard a soft, shaky voice. Someone was crying. "No, please. I just need a few more days," the voice begged. Keanu turned his head slightly, listening carefully. Behind the glass counter, a young bank worker was talking to her manager. She looked like she was around 25 years old. Her eyes were full of tears and her hands were shaking. She was trying not to cry, but it was hard. Keanu felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know this girl, but the way she was speaking, the way she looked so desperate, made him feel something deep inside. "Sienna, I'm sorry," the manager said in a firm but quiet voice. "You know the rules." "I've worked here for 3 years, Sienna pleaded. "I've never been late before. Just this one time, I just need until Friday, please." The manager sighed, looking uncomfortable. He glanced around the bank. "It's not up to me," he said. "The company has rules." Sienna's face fell. Her hands gripped the counter, her knuckles turning white. "I know the rules," she said, her voice shaking. "But I just need a little more time. Please, Mr. Whitaker." The manager hesitated. For a moment he looked like he wanted to help, but then he shook his head. "I'm sorry, Sienna. The decision has already been made." Sienna's body swayed slightly, like the words had knocked the breath out of her. Her chest moved up and down in uneven breaths. She looked stunned. Then, suddenly, she turned away, pressing her fingers against her temples like she was trying to hold herself together. Keanu clenched his jaw. He had seen that look before, on people who had lost everything, on friends who had nothing left. He didn't stop to think. He just acted. With a few quick steps, he walked toward the counter. The manager barely had time to react before Keanu pulled out a black leather wallet from his pocket. He took out a shiny black card and placed it on the counter. "Whatever she owes, put it on this." Silence filled the bank. Sienna turned, her tear-streaked face full of confusion. The manager blinked, his mouth slightly open. Even the security guard at the door straightened up, sensing that something important was happening. "Excuse me?" the manager said, his voice uneasy. Keanu pulled down his sunglasses just a little, letting the man see his eyes. The manager's breath caught in his throat. "And Mr. Reeves?" he stammered. Sienna's eyes went wide. She looked at Keanu, then at the card, then back at him. "Wait, you're Keanu Reeves?" she asked in disbelief. Keanu gave a small, shy smile. "Yeah." Then more seriously he repeated, "Take whatever she owes from that card. No questions." The bank was completely silent now. Customers, tellers, even people at the ATMs had stopped to stare. Some looked shocked. Others looked amazed. But Sienna? She looked frozen in place. Her hands were slightly raised, like she didn't know whether to reach for Keanu or step away. "Sir," the manager stammered. "That's incredibly generous. But this isn't just about money. The decision was made because of a rule?" Keanu interrupted. "Rules should never take away someone's dignity." Sienna let out a shaky breath. Her shoulders trembled. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. She placed a hand on her chest as if trying to steady herself. Keanu looked at her carefully, his expression softening. "What's going on, Sienna?" His voice was low and gentle, but also strong, like he really wanted to know. Sienna's lip trembled. For a moment she seemed like she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "My mom, she's sick. The bills, I just needed a little more time." Keanu inhaled deeply. His chest felt tight. The whole room was still, like everyone was holding their breath. Then, without another word, he picked up his card and put it back in his wallet. "Forget the debt," he said. The manager frowned. "Mr. Reeves, Keanu lifted a hand to stop him. "I'll take care of everything. Her bills, her rent, whatever she needs." He turned to Sienna, looking straight into her eyes. "You take care of your mom. That's your only job now." A sharp, broken sob escaped Sienna's lips before she could stop it. Her knees wobbled. She covered her mouth with her hands. Her whole body shook, like she couldn't believe what was happening. "Mr. Reeves, Keanu shook his head with a kind smile. "It's just Keanu." Sienna let out a teary, breathless laugh. Keanu, this is too much. I can't. You can, he said simply. And you will. At that moment, everyone in the bank seemed to realize they had just witnessed something rare. Something real. A kindness so big, so unexpected that it didn't seem possible. But it was. Keanu turned toward the exit, hands slipping into his pockets like nothing had happened. Like he had just paid for a cup of coffee. Like what he had just done wasn't extraordinary. At the door he paused and looked back. Take care of yourself, Sienna. And then he disappeared into the cold night air. Sienna stood there, tears streaming down her face, knowing her life had just changed forever. She felt frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. The bank, the people, the soft hum of the lights, it all felt far away. Keanu Reeves had just stepped into her life, erased her worries in a single moment, and left as if it was nothing. Tears still clung to her eyelashes as she gripped the counter for support. The bank manager, Mr. Whitaker, let out a deep breath and rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at Sienna. Sienna, he started to say, but he didn't know what else to add. Sienna wiped her face quickly and steadied her voice. Can I leave early? Whitaker hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, go. Without another word, she grabbed her coat and rushed out the door. The cold air hit her face as she stepped outside, but she barely felt it. Tonight the world felt different. The street was loud. Cars beeped. People walked fast. Bright lights flashed. But none of it mattered. Sienna turned her head, looking everywhere. She hoped to see Kiana. But Kiana was gone. Sienna felt strange, like she lost something before she even had it. But she had no time to think about that now. Her hands shook as she took out her phone. She called home. The phone rang 2 times before someone answered. Mom? Sienna said. Sweetheart, her mom said softly. She sounded tired but happy. Are you off work already? Sienna swallowed. Her throat felt tight. Yeah. I'll be home soon, okay? Just wait for me. Her mom's voice was warm. Even when times were hard, she always sounded strong. Of course, darling. Drive safe. Sienna nodded, even though her mom couldn't see her. Then she hung up and ran to her car. As she drove, memories filled her mind. Long nights in the hospital. Bills stacking up. Her mom pretending she was okay while secretly skipping her medicine to save money. Sienna had been working extra hours, selling things, doing everything to keep them going. Then out of nowhere, him. Keanu Reeves. It didn't feel real. When she reached home, she took a deep breath and stepped inside. Their small apartment smelled like tea. Her mom, Margaret, sat on the couch wrapped in a thick blanket. She used to be so full of energy. Now she looked weak, but her smile was still warm. Her mom's eyes lit up when she saw her. Sienna. Sienna dropped her bag by the door and ran to her. She knelt beside her and held her hands. For a moment she couldn't speak. Her mom frowned. Sweetheart, what's wrong? Sienna took a shaky breath. Nothing's wrong, Mom. She squeezed her hands and smiled through her tears. Everything's going to be okay. Her mom looked at her closely as if she could see what Sienna wasn't saying. Sienna, what happened? Sienna hesitated. Then the words spilled out, full of disbelief. Keanu Reeves. He was at the bank. He paid everything, Mom. He took care of it all. Her mom blinked. Keanu Reeves? As in the Keanu Reeves. Sienna let out a breathless laugh. Yeah. Her mom just stared, trying to understand. Then she laughed, soft and amazed. Oh, my dear girl. She reached up and tucked Sienna's hair behind her ear. You must have an angel watching over you. Sienna swallowed hard. She shook her head. No, Mom. I think we just met one. That night, Sienna couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again. The moment Keanu saved them. Years of struggle disappeared in an instant, thanks to a stranger. She had to find him. Not just to say thank you. Not just because he helped. There was something else. Something she couldn't name yet. And she knew this wasn't the end of their story. The morning sun peeked through the curtains. Sienna lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She had tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't stop thinking about him. Keanu Reeves. His name. His face. His voice. The way he stepped in without hesitation. She had seen him in movies 100 times. The world knew him as a famous actor. A legend. A hero in stories. But the man she met at the bank? That was no act. That was real. A soft cough pulled her from her thoughts. Her mom was waking up. You're up early, Margaret murmured. Sienna forced a smile. Did you sleep okay? Her mom sighed and Sienna knew what that meant. She was tired. Too tired. Sienna's stomach twisted. She had spent so long worrying about money, she hadn't noticed how much her mom had been pretending. Pretending to be okay. Pretending not to see how hard Sienna was working. But now, for the first time in years, they didn't have to pretend. Sienna picked up her phone and stared at it. She had to find him. Keanu sat in a small, quiet coffee shop. A cup of coffee sat in front of him, but he hadn't touched it. His dark hair was tied back and he wore a plain gray hoodie. He liked places like this. No flashing cameras. No fans whispering. No one asking him for things. Just normal people living their lives. But his mind wasn't here. It was stuck on yesterday. On her. Sienna. The girl with tired eyes and shaking hands. The girl who had been standing in that bank trying to be strong. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He had spent his life surrounded by fame and money, things that didn't really matter. But yesterday? That was real. She was real. And something told him their story wasn't over yet. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. Normally he ignored calls like that. But today something told him to answer. Hello. Silence. Then a shaky breath. Keanu? His breath caught. Sienna. She had found him. It hadn't been easy. She had called the bank, asked questions and searched online. Nothing. But then, out of desperation, she had turned to the one person who always believed in miracles. Her mother. Margaret had smiled and taken Sienna's hands. If he wanted to disappear, he could. But something tells me he doesn't. That was all it took. One person who knew someone else. And suddenly she had his number. She had no plan when she called. No script. No idea what she would say. But when he answered, when she heard his voice, steady, kind, familiar, she knew. This wasn't over. Sienna knew she had done the right thing. She let out a deep breath she didn't even realize she was holding. Yeah, it's me, she said. There was a short silence and then a warm, amused voice spoke. How did you find me? She laughed softly and ran a hand through her hair. I guess I don't give up easily. I'm starting to realize that, he said with a small chuckle. Another pause. Sienna swallowed and then said, I needed to say thank you. For everything. You don't have to, he replied. But I do, she insisted. You have no idea what you did for me. What you did for my mom. I don't know how to repay you. You don't have to repay me, he said simply. Just take care of her. Her throat tightened. I will. The line was quiet for a moment. Then softly he asked, Have you had breakfast yet? She blinked. What? He chuckled and something about the sound made her chest feel warm. Breakfast. You know, the thing people eat in the morning. She shook her head, smiling. I haven't. Another pause. Then he said, There's a small coffee shop on 5th and Maple. Meet me there. Sienna's heart pounded. She didn't know why she felt so nervous. Why the idea of seeing him again made her pulse race. But it did. Yes, she breathed. I'll be there. And just like that, their story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The cold morning air made Sienna shiver as she stood outside the small cafe. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself. The sun had just started to rise, painting the quiet street with a golden glow. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. But her heart wouldn't stop pounding. She didn't know why she was so anxious. Maybe because this wasn't just anyone. This was Keanu Reeves. The man who had helped her when she felt lost. The man who had saved her without asking for anything in return. The man whose voice had stayed in her mind long after their call ended. She exhaled sharply. What was she even doing here? Before she could think too much, the cafe door swung open. And there he was. Keanu. Wearing a simple black jacket and dark jeans. His eyes still held that quiet intensity. Here he wasn't a big movie star. He wasn't someone untouchable. He was just him. And yet, he still took her breath away. He spotted her instantly. A slow, easy smile tugged at his lips. You actually came. Sienna let out a shaky laugh. You thought I wouldn't? I wasn't sure. He tilted his head slightly, looking at her. You look different. She frowned. Different how? He shrugged. Lighter. Her breath hitched. Because for the first time in a long time, she did feel lighter. The weight of debt, fear, and hopelessness, it had been lifted. She still had worries. But now there was something else too. Oh. Keanu gestured toward the cafe door. Come on. Let's go inside before you freeze. She followed him in. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around them. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. People chatted softly. Cups clinked against saucers. They sat in a small booth by the window. Sienna wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, trying to stop them from shaking. Keanu leaned back, watching her. So, tell me about you. She blinked. Me? He nodded. I already know about the bank. About your mom. But you, who is Sienna? No one had asked her that in a long time. She hesitated. Then she smiled softly. I used to love writing stories. Since I was little. His expression changed. He looked intrigued. And now? She sighed. I stopped. Life got in the way. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, start again. Her eyes snapped up to his. What? His voice was steady, sure. You should write again. She let out a small, breathless laugh. It's not that simple. Why not? She opened her mouth, then closed it. She had spent so long putting her dreams on hold, convincing herself they didn't matter. But now, sitting across from Keanu Reeves, hearing him say it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Maybe it was that simple. Maybe she just had to try. She looked down, a small smile on her lips. Maybe I will. He smiled back. Good. Silence settled between them. But it wasn't awkward. It was easy. Comfortable. Like they had known each other much longer than just a few days. Then, out of nowhere, Keanu's expression turned playful. You know, he said, taking a sip of his coffee, I think you wanted to find me. Her cheeks warmed. What? He chuckled. You tracked me down. Called me. Showed up here. Seems like a lot of effort for just a thank you. She narrowed her eyes at him. And yet you answered the phone. Invited me here. His lips twitched. Touché. She laughed, shaking her head. Okay, fine. Maybe I did want to see you again. He leaned in slightly. Why? Her breath caught. She could lie. Brush it off. Pretend it was nothing. But something about the way he looked at her, calm, patient, like he already knew the answer, made her tell the truth. Because, she swallowed, you didn't have to help me. You didn't have to care. But you did. She met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. And I don't know if I'll ever understand why. Keanu was silent for a long moment. Then his expression softened. Because I know what it's like, he said quietly. She frowned. What do you mean? His jaw tensed slightly, like he was debating something. Then, in a voice so low she almost missed it, he said, I've lost people too. Her heart clenched. She had read about it, of course. The tragedies in his life. The loss of his best friend. His daughter. The woman he had loved. The pain he had carried for so long. And yet here he was, still kind, still giving, still believing in people. She didn't know what to say, but she didn't have to. Instead, she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She reached across the table and took his hand. Keanu's body tensed slightly like he was surprised, but he didn't pull away. Her fingers curled around his. Warm and steady. Thank you, she said softly. He tilted his head. For what? For showing up, she said. For caring. For being you. Something flickered in his eyes. Something she couldn't quite place. Then just as quietly, he gave her hand a gentle squeeze. A moment passed. Then another. The world outside kept moving, cars rushing by, people walking past. But inside everything felt still. Finally, Keanu exhaled and leaned back, releasing her hand. But the warmth of his touch still lingered. He gave her a small smile, shifting the mood. So, he said, tell me something good. Something that makes you happy. Sienna blinked, caught off guard. Happy? He nodded. No sadness. No stress. Just something that makes you smile. She thought for a moment. It had been so long since she let herself focus on something like that. Then, without thinking, she said, the smell of old books. Keanu's lips twitched. Old books. She laughed, feeling shy. Yeah. I used to spend hours in the library as a kid. There's something about the way old paper smells. It's like time frozen in place. You know. His expression softened. I get that. Her eyes widened. You do. He nodded. I used to spend a lot of time in bookstores when I was younger. I still do when I get the chance. Something about that made her heart ache. In the best way. They kept talking. About books. About childhood memories. About little things that made them happy. And somewhere between the laughter and the quiet moments, Sienna realized something. She wasn't just surviving anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.